All right. Well, welcome everybody to IPPR. I'm Nick Pearce, I'm lead director here, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this event this morning. We're very fortunate indeed to have with us Professor Qi Ye, who is, as you know, one of the most influential experts on Chinese energy policy, director of the Brookings Xinhua Center for Public Policy, and is the lead author, as people will know, of an annual report analysing how China is doing in its low carbon transition, and headed up the first design of China's first low carbon development plan. So very, very important. And to talk to them this morning, also one of our leading players on British climate change policy, the FCO, the Foreign Office's Foreign Secretary's leading advisor in the run-up to Paris on our diplomatic efforts for securing a global deal at Paris, Sir David King, formerly Chief Scientific Advisor, Chief Scientist in the UK as well. So very, very important person to have here with us this morning. We at IPPR are doing a series on the run-up to Paris. This is the second event we've held in that series, and we think it's very important that we as think tanks contribute to some of the discussions, the public policy discussions that take place in the UK and elsewhere in these incredibly important months in the preparation for the December summit in Paris. So we shall be publishing work over the next few months contributing to this discussion, as well as hosting events such as today. Please do get in touch with us about that. My colleague Paul Straw, who's leading all the work, is here today. A little bit of housekeeping. Firstly, just to say we are on the record and being live streamed on our website, and if you want to tweet anything, please use the hashtag Road to Paris and hashtag IPPR. So that's enough for me. I'm going to hand over now to Sir David King. Sir David.
Thank you very much. Qi and I have known each other for a while. We've published a couple of papers together. I took a great deal of interest in what was happening in November 2012 when the Chinese Communist Party changed its constitution to include phrases like eco-civilization, managing human well-being alongside managing ecosystems being written into the constitution. Seemed like it might be quite an important event. And that was then confirmed at the People's Congress. Incidentally, People's Congress opened today, so this is quite an important occasion in China. That's an understatement. Now, he and I have worked quite closely on climate issues. We have a big project at the moment with Indian, Chinese, European, and United States experts working on risk analysis around climate change. We hope to publish that in July this year. This is a detailed analysis of the risks that we're faced with associated with climate change in different countries. Having this conversation, I want to really open it up with Qi telling you what he's doing and how it relates to the upcoming Paris meeting.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this, I would consider very important conversation. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank IPPR for organizing this event. And in particular, I want to thank Professor King for sparing his time from his very tight schedule. I know very, very well. Professor King, as just mentioned, we've been doing a lot of work together, and I see him not only a great friend, but indeed my mentor on the issue of climate change and clean energy, and he has been working so tirelessly on this issue. Before I share with you what I and my team has been doing in China, and I would like to share two stories. What's going on in China on this domestic front, and also on this international front. Domestically, it's really interesting. The change is very, very fast. On Saturday, I arrived on Saturday here in London, and as soon as I got to hotel, I realized my mailbox and my social media, we have a Chinese version of Twitter, which is called WeChat. So all jammed with these links and the videos about this former journalist who produced a video and released on Saturday, the 28th of February. Some of you probably have noticed that Professor King told me the Guardian has reported this event. This is quite amazing. It's probably a benchmark event as we see it maybe 10 years from today. So basically, this is a former journalist from the China's Central Television, and she quit 1 year ago. She produced a video on air pollution, the PM 2.5 or smog. So when I look at the title on smog, and just quickly checked it, she wants to answer 3 questions. So this smog or PM 2.5, and one question, what it is, what is it? The second question, where it is from. The third question, and what we can do about it. When I look at the 3 questions, and I said, well, I know what it is, and I know where it's from, and I pretty much know, what we can do about it. Then I just quickly I just neglect it. But later in the day, I was told the viewers for this video already exceeded 100 million within a day. That's the moment that I said, okay, I have to look at this. Well, but it's just about air pollution, and I'm interested in it not because of its content, or not only because of its content, but really the interest, the enthusiasm about it. Right? This is just one day before the National People's Congress get together in China, which has started yesterday. So it's just overwhelmed the news on this very important, the most important event in China, the annual event in China, almost overwhelmed everything, and it generates a huge conversation. I mean, the story was really simple. I mean, at the time when Dave and I were sitting in the hotel lounge 2 years ago, 2013, and this lady was still working for CCTV. And that's the month she realized she was pregnant. And a few months ago, she was diagnosed. Her baby has some kind of tumor before the birth, and required a medical surgery after that. So she became very interested in this issue of air pollution. Became very concerned about her baby. When she grow up, when the baby grows up, then what kind of a world she has to live in. So this generated a lot of passion on this issue. Air pollution is an environmental problem, but it has turned to be a social problem, and now it has turned to be a political issue. It's really a threat, in my view, a factor of threat to our thinking of the political legitimacy to some people. So this is why this is a very critical moment and a very critical event, and all this pressure, this social pressure and political pressure has already translated into a pressure to cut the air pollution. We know in order to cut air pollution, we have to think about coal, because in China, 2/3 of the energy is actually from coal. And each year, last year, China consumed just about 4 billion tons of coal, just about 1/2 of the world's coal consumption. This is a major factor. So we also know September 2013, the Chinese government put in place the air pollution prevention and control regulation. And that regulation requires some major areas in China, like in Beijing, Tianjin area, like in Shanghai area, or in Guangzhou, Shenzhen area, to put a cap on coal consumption. We know this has been extremely difficult. It has been discussed for 1.5 decades, but never this was materialized. But with this, the control on coal due to the concern of air pollution, China last year, they reduced its coal consumption by nearly 3%. By nearly 3%. Think about that's 4 billion tons a year. So 3% is actually a very large number. Of course, this is not the only reason why coal consumption was reduced. We also know last year the China's economic growth rate has been down to a record low level for the last 20 years. It was 7.4%. Yes, indeed, we do consider it a very, very low rate of growth. And these factors, together with the air pollution control, so this has reduced the coal consumption in a very significant way. In the past, we often think the coal peak will not arrive until after 2020. Now people are talking about, well, maybe it is possible to move to advance the coal peak to much earlier than 2020. If indeed this happens, this will be a major achievement and a great news for climate change, for greenhouse gas. So this is a domestic story, and of course we all know the story on the international front. Last year in November, and when David and I were meeting in Boston, days after that, we get back home and we hear this big news on the joint announcement between US and China. This was on November 12th, just only a few days when we got back. So this joint announcement is considered to be significant for two reasons. Number one, this is the first time the Chinese government put an absolute emission cut target on the emissions. So basically, this announcement said China anticipates to reach the carbon peak around 2030, and try to make every effort to make that happen earlier. So the first time. The second reason this is significant because this announcement also talked about the share of non-fossil fuel energy. So by 2030, China plans to have a share of non-fossil fuel energy at the level of 20%. Right now it is just about 10%. So the share will double, while the overall energy consumption continue to go. So this is quite amazing because when you look at the absolute amount, it's just translate into the 800 to 1,000 gigawatts of capacity, the generation capacity. And we know that is just the amount of generation capacity in the United States. Right now, that is close to 10 times, I would demand in the UK. So this is a very large amount of electricity to be generated by non-fossil fuel energy. So basically, we're close to near zero or zero emissions in here. So this announcement was a surprise to many. Including those of us who work in the climate change area, and we know just 1 year ago, almost 1 year ago, February 14th, when the President Xi Jinping, the Chinese President Xi Jinping, met with the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, and on that Valentine's Day, well, we know climate change is nothing but romantic. But the two talked about this issue at that moment, that meeting, and President Xi Jinping basically told John Kerry, so we want to take action, not only because you guys want us to do because of this international pressure. It's really we need to take action. We have to take action because of a lot of domestic concern. So this one major concern is from that this air pollution control, and also China realizes that China is one of the most vulnerable country impacted by climate change. So from these two stories, from the first story we know, and there is a really tremendous political pressure on the Chinese government, on the society, on the business in general, to take action on cutting the air pollution by cutting the coal consumption. And by cutting the coal consumption, you can actually, you are cutting the greenhouse gas emission. So the two actually go hand in hand. The second story told us, this international effort, as one that Dave has been leading from the UK side. This kind of international efforts are really, really important. As we move to Paris, this is just becoming more and more obvious. So a lot of people I don't want to give people a wrong impression that China just concerned about its own issues when it comes to climate change action. Well, now, I thought it's interesting to share that at the very beginning, when this new administration led by Xi Jinping, and he talked about the need for all human beings, all the world, to work together, and he talked about this thinking of the world as we have the people share a common destiny, in his own words. Also, Dave just talked about this the idea that he and his administration is promoting is this eco civilization or ecological civilization. And we know it is not very popular to talk about this phrase, especially here in London, here in the UK. We know people here really let the civilization we are in right now, the industrial civilization. And the Chinese view said, we're just at the moment, perhaps we have to rethink about the industrial civilization. We're probably in the moment to enter a new stage of civilization. In that new stage, we need to address both growth of the economy and the environmental protection, for a sustainable future. And I see this conversation is particularly important to have dialogue on this. So this we see some clash. We see some conflicts between this industrial processing ecological process, of course. But I think the two kind of thinking should go hand in hand, and for us to address our common threat. Let me just stop over here, and I think this is supposed to be a dialogue, not a speech. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I do want to follow up with a few questions. So, Xi Jinping appointed a new environment minister just on Friday.
Yes.
A colleague of yours from Tsinghua University. He appointed Chen Ying.
Mm.
And I think I want to hear your opinion of that appointment, but also it's a question of this documentary, the Caijing documentary. Is this raising political legitimacy issues for the government? And is the government likely to respond positively to this? Is this massive publicity around this documentary going to lead to significant changes?
Mm. Well, these two questions actually are related in a nice way. The Professor Chen Jining, who even a month ago was a professor in Tsinghua University, who was the president of Tsinghua University where I teach. And he received his PhD from Imperial College in mid-1990s here in London. Worked here for a number of years before he returned back to China in 1998. He himself is an environmental scientist, and he has been leading several major research projects and programs in China. And this new appointment of Professor Chen being the new Minister of Environmental Protection is considered to be very significant. He's probably the first one, we consider him the real expert in this area. Also, he's very, very passionate about this. He is now the youngest minister in China. So the coincidence in between that video, which was released so just one day of this appointment, and also the enaction of the new environmental protection law, and also this National People's Congress is really interesting. They generated a lot of imagination. They're thinking about this. So I think that they're really going into a direction that bring us higher hope and expectations. As a matter of fact, this Minister Chen just called Chai Ding yesterday, congratulating her and also praising her effort. So I think this is really interesting. That issue, Dave, about this legitimacy issue, I thought is really interesting, and it's also very important. 2 years ago, in 2013, about the time when you and I met, then I wrote an article talking about this issue of legitimacy. This is for the McKinsey Quarterly, and I remember that the editor asked me, he said, "Are you sure you really want to use the word legitimacy here?" Then so we're talking about this issue because I think the issue is really serious, and the government is really taking this in a very serious way.
So, I mean, I think that coincidence can't be a coincidence, but I can say that we are looking at an issue which has become so serious. If you enter the British Embassy, you'll find carbon filters everywhere. It has become serious for health matters for everyone living in the cities of China.
Absolutely.
And so the Chinese government obviously is looking for stimuli to create the responses that are needed to deal with it, which are going to be difficult for the economy to manage going forward in time. So you also raised the point that the Chinese government, for the first time, have talked about the absolute amount of CO2 emissions. Ye has been the person responsible for measuring CO2 emissions through his team in Tsinghua for the whole of China. He announces it every year. And the Chinese government has been stating emissions intensity objectives, and every year they wait with bated breath to see if they've achieved their objectives when he announces it. And I think what is therefore interesting, that 2030, it would be useful to discuss for a moment whether it is possible that we could see that shifting over the coming months in the negotiations to 2025. 2020. Am I pushing this too hard?
No, I think you're doing just fine because in Copenhagen, and just January 20, after Copenhagen, January 2010, the Chinese government's pledge on the target was to reduce the carbon intensity by 40 to 45%. But they're talking about, that's also around they give a range over there. So this time on the peaking time is also just around 2030 and trying to make it earlier. So so you see a buffer or some room is built in over there. And I think this is this reflects the one important fact, which is the uncertainty, the understanding of this issue. When you and I were in Boston, this only like 4 days before this was even announced, and we talked about different scenarios, scenarios by IPCC, some studies by MIT and joint MIT and Tsinghua, ERI, and have some colleagues over here in East Anglia. There are a number of studies, and that shows really a range of the possible peaking time. So I think that the 2030 or around 2030 is a responsible position. So I think the Chinese government does not want to give an impression that the 2030 is fixed, right? Then they tried very hard to give a impression that this is possible, and this may be even likely, but they're trying to making the effort to get that peak earlier. There are the uncertainties is really about two things, in my view. One is the economic growth. Last year, when the coal consumption dropped for 2.9%, and people like myself are very hopeful for early peaking of the coal, but quickly a lot of people pointed out that the economy may grow back and with a higher rate, and you also need to the supply of gas, which last year replaced a lot of coal consumption last year, and but the supply of natural gas or shale gas, that is there is uncertainty over there. There's a economic uncertainty. Another uncertainty is really about the financing this non-fossil fuel energy. And we know in order to produce the 1,000 gigawatts of capacity, the financing is really a critical matter. And this is even though the Chinese government now seems to have quite a bit of cash, but still, in order to financing an effort like this is not one single country can do it alone. I mean, this really depends on the overall global economic situation. So I think there are the big uncertainty over there. But you just reminded me about this how we can actually work together. Right? This is in all these negotiations. I see we have these negotiations have been dominated by who should do what by how much. When it comes to for all of us to work together, I think this is often toward the end of the negotiation, or we have no time to talk about it, even think about it. I think this is this reminds us, if we in a way we can work together, perhaps we can together to achieve an earlier peak for the carbon emission.
I mean, just very quickly to come back on that. China needs, with a normal expectation of growth, which is now 7%, another 1,000 gigawatts of energy, whatever form it takes, by 2030. So the infrastructure investment will have to take place. It's now a question then of to what extent it will be in hydropower, solar, wind, energy storage, etc.
Right.
But I think the important thing is that the prices are becoming competitive. So I don't think we're looking at a high additionality of cost.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I think the price is getting a lot better. That's for the energy side. On the other hand, let's look at the demand side. Right now, China has continued to be in this stage of industrialization, continue to be urbanizing right now every year, and we see 13 million people moving from the rural area into the urban area. It's infrastructure and housing is certainly a very huge demand not only for the production of materials, but for energy consumption. So, if we realistically by 2030, we're looking at perhaps by then we're at another 300 million people into the cities, and together with it, this large amount of demand for infrastructure, for housing, and for supply. This production here. I think we need to balance these two. It's not quite realistic right now to when you think about all these factors to produce all this added energy through non-fossil fuel. But you're absolutely right, and I think that the price is getting a lot better, get better and better, and the price for carbon is getting worse and worse. But the fact is, just last week, the EU and the Chinese government announced there will be a nationwide carbon market starting next year. So we are talking about, I mean, right now the EU ETS is the largest, but we are talking about a market that is 2 to 3 times as large as the EU ETS. So that means that on that fact, the carbon market, the carbon price is getting worse and worse. So that helps the development of renewables.
So can I just share a few points before I open it up for questions? First of all, that the British government is probably making a bigger effort on climate negotiations generally than any other government. We see climate change as the biggest diplomatic challenge of our era. We have a very large number of full-time climate attaches in our embassies around the world, a significant number in the embassy in Beijing. So we do focus our energy on the countries where a change in positioning is critically important and where we're invited in to help. And that really forms the basis of our relationship. I just thought I ought to say this isn't a perchance relationship. It is part of British government policy. We're also working, of course, very closely with the Indian government, the Brazilian government, the other big players around the world. It's also worth just reminding people that we created our own International Climate Fund, and that International Climate Fund at £3.89 billion is pretty close to the Green Climate Fund at $10 billion. So, the British effort around climate negotiations and the financial backup, very significant support for the New York Declaration on Forests coming from British finance. We are making a very, very big effort. I think as we move forward, there's no question that in my mind, we're going to reach an agreement in Paris. And one reason for saying this is the sense of optimism that I pick up from this discussion, and I hope you pick up too. But I really want to continually remind people that Paris is the starting point of the next phase. This is by no means going to be a done deal. It means that we can take it on to a more realistic phase, but the work begins again at that point. Right, let me ask for questions. And please give your name, even though I recognize you.
Crispin Tickell. I was a member of a body called the China Council for Environmental Development for many years. I was always struck by the willingness of the Chinese leadership, ranging from Deng Xiaoping to Wen Jiabao, to entertain these sort of arguments that you've been putting forward. And I think for that reason, anyone should think that the Chinese government is against things like this is wrong. The Chinese have been thinking about this for many years in their own national interest, largely because of the water problem, as you know very well. That said, what I think is very important in looking at climate change issues is to link them with the other issues that are relevant. And in the case of China, that's particularly the case with water supplies, it's the case with loss of biodiversity, with the loss of public support for these things, which is very important. The public should understand more clearly what is going on. All those things, I think, are are very important, and I noticed that Sir David referred to these related matters, because I think any approach to climate change, whether in this country or in China, must take account of the other factors which link with it. And for that reason, I just wanted to say to you that I think that the more that you can bring in the related issues, the more convincing it is to the general public, whether here or anywhere else.
Well, first of all, let me just say that the council you served on, the China Council for International Cooperation on Environment and Development, is a long word. We call it CCICED, is the highest consultation council, international, led by the premier, the vice premier himself. It's also the longest council international in China. It has served over there for just about 1/4 of a century, and it has made just tremendous contribution for environment and development. I want to take this opportunity to show my gratitude to yourself and to the council in general. I couldn't agree more with you on that. Addressing climate change is really, really important. I think finally, just about 10 years ago, we began to see this gradually, the momentum on climate change is gradually picked up in China. So, but at the same time, we have to link this issue with many other important and urgent issues together. So this is the idea of the co-benefit. All right. When I was talking about air pollution, we're talking about reducing greenhouse gas emission. The Chinese government approach is trying to see, so what are the areas where we can maximize this co-benefit, for all economic growth, the employment, the air pollution control, and greenhouse gas reduction. So this is not easy. This is not easy. We 10 years, 12 years ago, when Professor King, when your government was developing the white paper on energy, when you proposed this idea of low carbon economy, real quickly, this was picked up by the Chinese government. To 2008, the Chinese government just made 5 pilots. 2010, 13 pilots, and 2012, 42 pilots, just to build on this idea of low carbon economy. We are very serious in looking at, what this low carbon economy, how this low carbon economy idea has been translated into reality. Because when it comes to this low carbon development, all this integrated approach, we really look at you. I think these are the areas we can find not only multiple benefit, but also multiple benefit for all. I totally agree with you.
Can I add one small point?
Right.
That is, I should have mentioned before, that one of the more important points made by the Chinese in the years in which I served on the council was the need to redefine economic growth. That people talk such nonsense about growth as if it was the only way of measuring the health and wealth and well-being of a society.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that some of the Chinese thinking of those years may filter into the Western mind, because they haven't yet. You still find most politicians talk about growth, but they very rarely know what they mean. And I think it's very important that growth should be associated with other things, not just producing more material.
Great point. Thank you.
Question.
Nick, one of the striking things about China is the
Can you speak up?
One of the striking things about China is the rapid urbanization and the hundreds of millions of people moving into cities, which are going to require more and more buildings. So my question is really about the energy efficiency of those buildings, because that seems to be quite key, and the degree perhaps to which Europe and the UK could collaborate and contribute to maximise the efficiency of those buildings and bring to bear any technology or expertise that you have?
Well, that's pretty technical question. When it comes to buildings, we divide it into 4 categories. One is the energy efficiency for the residential buildings. The second is the energy efficiency for these public and office buildings. Third is for this energy efficiency for the houses in the rural area. The fourth one is about the energy efficiency in the district heating, especially in the northern part of China. So when you look at the energy efficiency in these large office buildings, you probably find them similar to these large office buildings here in this city. And in general, they are not very good. They are not very, even though the building code is there. So, but for the residential buildings, even for these rural houses, and particularly for the district heating, the energy efficiency has been significantly higher than the most of the buildings here we see in Europe, and not to say in the United States. So it is not how well these buildings are built. It has a lot to do with how you operate it. The Chinese has historically traditionally has been when you use the buildings, you do the window, and it's a building, it's a passive design, and a lot of that really has to do. You compare the energy efficiency in residential buildings between Beijing to, say, Stockholm or Copenhagen, you find that amazingly the energy efficiency is actually a lot higher in China for the residential because of this the habit of operating using these buildings. However, as people using this electronic appliances, and this is growing very fast. And this is something we have to be really careful to watch it. As a matter of fact, the growing rate of the energy intensity or the energy use for building sector and for the transport sector is much higher than that in the industrial sector. So that's a very good question.
I'm just going to add a comment. The British have set up a not-for-profit company funded by the British government, Future Cities Catapult. I'm the chairman of Future Cities Catapult. And just to take the last bit of your question, I have had over the last year discussions with ministers of housing in China, and we're preparing to go in on a big collaborative operation.
Michael Grubb, Professor at UCL and Senior Advisor to the UK Energy Regulator. Two questions around emission prospects, if I may. The first is actually partly anecdotal. It's 25 years ago in Britain, the Department of Trade and Industry was projecting, so 1990, the official projection was that UK emissions would be 30% increased by 2000, within a decade. Mrs. Thatcher upset quite a lot of people in asserting Britain's goal would be to return its emissions to 1990 levels by 2000. We actually ended up 8% below 1990 levels. So the ability of forecasting to get it massively wrong is one thing that one needs to be careful. Understand, and partly points in economic development where there are structural changes. And I just wonder your personal views on whether the Chinese economy in any sense is at a sort of comparable stage of potential structural break in trends. Second question relates to the fact that in July last year I was in Beijing and I had dinner with Professor Jianhong. This was the week after the US-China bilateral, not the announcement, but the annual session. And he said that actually the Chinese were really disappointed in what the Americans said, that They kind of brought forward very modest projections. China laid out everything on the table. Americans had really rather modest levels of ambition for reducing emissions in the US. And that this was a pity because they were hoping for a bit more progressive engagement, more ambition, etc. I got back and had a word with someone from the Foreign Office. He said, well, that's funny, the Americans told us the exact opposite. But they were really disappointed the Chinese were not offering more ambitious projections because they knew that there were Chinese academics who looked at peaking in 2025 and 2020. And it's kind of inevitable in the semi-diplomatic setting, but do you have a sense of the processes through which we can get sort of a little bit more mutual trust, transparency, ambition into the way that countries are sharing what they might actually be able to achieve?
Well, it's really good seeing you again, Michael. As you know, I am a student of your planetary economics, and I probably can try to take some of the methods and the logic you use over there to answer your first question. Personally, no, I don't think China is in that stage where you can see there's a significant drop of the energy, the carbon emissions in 20 years. But 25 years maybe, but for now, I just explained this, a lot of uncertainties built in there. But you mentioned the U.S. Perhaps the U.S. is in a much better position to go into that direction. Let me just try to just extend my thinking on the second question you just raised. This is something, Dave, I think is, as a general issue or a concern about the international negotiations. Since we are all in this framework and thinking this COPs, the international negotiation, inevitably we are thinking in this game theoretic way about this. But that explains why, from the Chinese perspective, we see the U.S. could have done better and vice versa. So I think one factor that has to do with this is really the design of the game. The design of the game is, say, remember 5 years ago, when we're moving to Copenhagen, we're talking about ambitious, we're talking about the legally binding. And this, I see personally, this is a pretty European way of thinking. Look at within the EU system. I mean, it has proved to be working quite well. But when you scale this up to cover the 190 some parties, it really doesn't work very well to some extent. And while you're making your pledges, your commitment, you're thinking about this legally binding, and this legally binding will have the feedback and say, wait a second, what if I don't? Well, I cannot deliver, right? So the politicians, when they're thinking about their terms, and we're thinking about all these factors, they probably want to take a rather passive approach rather than a proactive approach. I think it has a lot to do with that setting. So what we have learned, as bad as disappointed as it is for the Copenhagen, but what we have learned from Copenhagen is, when it's no legally binding provision there, people actually can do pretty well. It's probably fair to say, under Copenhagen, the nations has done no less, at least no less than under Kyoto Protocol, which was supposed to be legally binding. So I think this might remind us, what would be a effective way of approaching this. I totally agree with Dave on the Paris. Right now we are pretty optimistic to reach agreement. However, this is different than Copenhagen. However, if we look at the pledges so far, the intended nationally determined contributions, it's still, they are nowhere near the target for the 2 degree centigrade target, right? So so basically we are reaching an agreement that does not really work for the 2 degrees if we continue to hold the 2 degrees. So I really think this is really not the end of the game. I agree with you. And this is the beginning. You know, we make our best effort, but take this effort as a first step for a long process where we can come back to review it, to learn, and to try to make it better. So I think the design, it's not too late even now to thinking about the design of this game, right?
Let me just insert a brief comment there. You
Right.
mentioned game theory
Right.
and negotiations. My own position when I was working with the Blair government was very simple. What I said to the government was we ought to do what we think everyone should do. And then we can go out and say, this is what we're doing, what will you do?
Right.
It's very, very different from the kind of negotiating. So the origin of our Climate Change Act of Parliament 2008 lay in that. We will reduce emissions by 80%, bringing us to roughly 2 tons per person per
Right.
annum. And at that time, I was thinking 2 tons per person per annum by mid-century is where the whole planet needs to be. So arguing for an allowance per person, country by country, was behind that 80% reduction proposal. Now, however, we're now in a negotiating model
Right.
where the European Union is the bloc, not the British government.
Right.
And you will know that you're saying 2030 or earlier.
Right.
We are saying at least 40%. That at least was the insistence of us, the British government.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that has left an interesting opportunity for a joint statement
Right.
from our 2 governments,
Yes.
in
Right.
which we can push each other.
Uh-huh.
We've left a slight door open with the at least. They've left a door open at least 2030.
All right.
And it would be interesting to see if we can now get into a negotiating position on that.
Dave, real quickly, I think you just mentioned, you know, that approach said just lay out, this is what is needed, this is what we are going to do. I think that itself really changes the game, right? So change the game from a game theoretic, this the multiple feedback mode to just a possibility of raising to the bottom to the top rather than to the bottom. And also, I mean, this is I'm so excited about the new initiative you and the British government is designing, for promoting the clean energy. And I think that's a very different game. That's a very different game as compared to this the UNFCCC, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, we've got a question here and a question here.
Thinking from RTCC Climate News. Could you talk a bit about the next 5-year plan? We've got this National People's Congress, and I understand the next 5-year plan is going to be discussed there. What kinds of tougher coal targets do you think they may discuss? Is there any appetite perhaps to cut these subsidies for these sort of ghost energy intensive products we hear about? And a quick one to David. You said that the British government is doing more than any other country in terms of climate diplomacy. I mean, given your budget was cut last year by 30%, how are you doing that? And are you being given more money this year to actually help your efforts?
That's a great question.
The second half is not great.
Okay, I have no comment on that part. It's a great question about the 13th 5-year plan. As we know, China used to be a central planning economy, and the economic reform started late 1978 in order to change that to a market-based economy. Surprisingly, until this day, we are, 3.5 decades after that, we are still using that tool of a 5-year plan, and we think it's great. We think it's a great tool. So for every 5-year plan, you build in some policy targets, and in order to achieve the overall goal of a policy. So related to this, I would imagine for the next 5-year plan will be 4 relevant targets. We'll continue to use the energy intensity and carbon intensity target, because this would, to fulfill the Copenhagen pledges, 40 to 45% reduction in energy, the carbon intensity. In addition to these two, we'll expect to see the absolute cap on the energy use for certain areas, not for all countries, but for certain areas. Already, we have seen by this day, and the energy target is required for about 10 provinces, 10, 1/3 of the provinces. So for 13th five-year plan, I do expect that number will increase to include more provinces for absolute not energy, the coal consumption. Lastly, for the carbon intensity, for the carbon emission, I do expect for the 13th five-year plan, there would be some serious cap. There is some serious cap to be put in place. This is consistent with the carbon market we're talking about starting in the 2016. Whether or not it's a nationwide cap or it is just caps for provinces, I think that's something still under discussion. But I do think it's really moving into that direction.
Well, I've still got to deal with the tail end of that question, the cut in budget by 30%. The two foreign secretaries I've worked under over the past 16 months have protected the operation that I'm responsible for. So the climate attaches are still in place. I worked with the two foreign secretaries in the Labour government to set up the climate attaches and the Science and Innovation Network, and both are still in place today. I've got a question right at the back. Sorry. I'm going to take one at the front and then I'll come to you.
Will Straw from IPPR. Actually, I was very pleased that you raised the point about 2 degrees centigrade and how the existing commitments on the table do not yet reach 2 degrees. But obviously there is the flexibility, as Sir David mentioned, in both the EU and the Chinese proposals. Be interested in your perspective on whether you've been given any impression that there's also flexibility in the US plans, and indeed what you see as the process after Paris for potentially ratcheting up those commitments. Is that something that countries in all likelihood would do unilaterally? Is it something where there's a lot of scope for bilateral negotiations, or will it have to be through future UNFCCC meetings? And so David, I just wanted to get your perspective on whether delays in that ratcheting up beyond 2015 might expose the UK for having a domestic position on climate change, which did go rather further than the EU and indeed global position.
I'm not in a great position to answer the flexibility in the US side. However, I would like to point out that there's a joint announcement between US and China. It is not only for climate change, it's a joint announcement on climate change and clean energy cooperation. That second part, I see it's very, very important. While the rest of the world look at the joint announcement focusing on the climate change target and the flexibilities within that target, I think the second part is equally or even more important. That's where I do see flexibilities. I do see hope for the higher achievement. U.S. and China has been for many years engaging this cooperation on clean energy and with different levels of successes. So if the two parties are really serious about this cooperation and putting in resources into that and work in the best approach to this cooperation, I do see that this will bring in great hope and for just make it better, better than the targets on the climate change announcement. Right.
And my part of the question is the UK too exposed? I mean, the first thing to say is the UK is alongside European partners. So in that sense, no, we're not exposed. We're also alongside other countries in Latin America, for example. We're a bit behind Costa Rica. Costa Rica is planning to be CO2 neutral by 2025. We are, I don't think, completely out of line, but we're certainly sitting there amongst the leaders. I think that gives us an economic advantage. The business of planning to be where we need to be by 2050 means that we can avoid stranded assets. I think that's a critical pathway. That 2050 calculator produced by our Department of Energy and Climate Change, which is the calculator used to look at investments in infrastructure around all aspects of energy, means that when we come up to replace aging infrastructure, we replace it with infrastructure that's fit for purpose in 2050. That calculator has now gone out around the world through our diplomatic process. There are now 12 countries that we have assisted in adapting that calculator, including China, including India. The most recent country to fully adapt and apply it is Indonesia. Precisely this point around avoiding stranded assets in the future. So I don't think that is an exposure that is a negative factor. I think that is the way the world is moving, and being ahead of the game has very real advantages. I've got a question now right today.
I have a colleague with Bank of Merrill Lynch. A couple of finance-related questions. So first, during negotiations, now that the Green Climate Fund is capitalized, would you anticipate, either of you actually, any new initiatives being announced to try to close the financing gap that's often talked about? And then secondly, outside the negotiations from a China perspective, there's been a lot of talk recently about the China Green Credit Guidelines. Any other kinds of initiatives that you're aware of in the Ministry of Finance? What sort of dialogue do you have with your colleagues at the other ministries of finance?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, go first on the Green Climate Fund, standing at, as I said, about $10 billion, means that it can be operationalized. It's now a fund with funds in it, and we're still developing the rules, as I'm sure you're aware. But in my travels around the world, that $10 billion, for example, in African countries, is seen to be a very significant incentive for reaching an agreement in Paris. It's not seen as a blocker because it's not 100 billion. It is already seen as a pot of money that people are beginning to gear up to putting applications in for. I do want to say, in terms of GCF, it is wrong to focus on that as the only sum of money available for the objectives of adaptation and mitigation in the developing countries. Our own big pot of money is the 0.7% of GDP that goes into ODA. And our Department for International Development sees development as including climate resilience and climate mitigation. So it's very important to see that this much bigger pot of money, that's just the British pot of what is it, $17 billion a year, that pot has a significant proportion going in the same direction. So I think it's a mistake to think of the GCF as the only money dealing with this issue. Now,
well, my answer to that question would be easy. It would be simple. I would certainly, under Paris, would like to see an ambitious agreement reached on this the financing issue. It's critically important. For the second question you talked about, I think this green credit guidelines is not new, as you know, and has been there for a number of years. It's just the implementation of that has been not so great. So with the new environmental protection law, which was enacted 2 months ago, and I do expect a much better implementation on that and more. And also for say the green taxation, including the carbon tax, would also be possible to come to the top of the agenda, for discussion. I think the back to where we started, when we look at the new administration and the general public are putting so much focus on this issue of environmental protection domestically and globally. And I do see, we need all these instruments for implementing the policy target.
When you look at Richard Norris at Greencoat, when you look at most projections as to how we decarbonize, nuclear has to play a huge part. Our rather pathetic efforts to get 3.2 gigawatts away don't really seem to be yielding very much, even at £92 a megawatt hour. I sit on the board of Urenco as well, which is a big fuel enricher for nuclear. And we had a presentation from McKinsey about what Chinese signification, essentially, of the AP1000 should do to the cost of nuclear. And I wondered, have you sort of been tracking that? Because that was admittedly 4 years ago. They hold out very strong hopes that China signification in nuclear, that's equivalent to signification in PV, will take us to a wholly different cost position in nuclear. And I just wondered where you think whether you have any evidence on how that journey is going, and will we come up with a cost that fits?
I do not. Of course, 4 years ago, that was before the Fukushima. The discussion was a little different after Fukushima, and there was a short period of hesitation in China. Then after that, after a pretty thorough review of the issues, and I think that the final decision was China will move ahead. And now with this new call for what we call it, a revolution of energy production and consumption. And I think nuclear is expected to play even bigger role than that aftermath discussion on that. I do not really have the numbers and on the capacity and on the financing side, but this is as I see it, is a real important issue. We're talking about this is say just from the risks point of view, this can be a really large issue, big issue to be of concern. When we're talking about a very large scale of nuclear and to be deployed in a relatively short period of time in extremely populated area in the world. So for one thing, I would be very interested in learning, what does it look like in terms of the risks, right?
Eric Lewis from the National Audit Office. Again, to do with affordability issues, I was struck by the scale of the future generation which you were saying had to be built. And obviously in this country, the question of consumer affordability has become a major issue. We now have a levy control framework in place to limit the costs borne by consumers, really. How does affordability pan out in China, given the scale of the costs which must be associated with the energy revolution you want over the next 20 years?
I think that's a very legitimate issue now, considering that the consumers, the average household, they are paying their electricity bill per kilowatt hours, just similar to that in the United States. So, but that being said, I think there is a bigger issue is about the industrial users. China implements a price system, a differential price system for consumers, for households, and for industrial consumers of electricity. So this would have, as it goes, will have some major impact, but more impact I would expect on the industry as compared to the household side. So Dave and I were talking about this this cost and price issues on the renewable energy. It's really getting better. It's really getting better. But how you can distribute all this cost among different users and between the suppliers and the consumers is really a core issue now, right now at the moment, for this the power reform, the power system reform. And the Chinese government at the very top, they really take this as a top issue. The top the top decision makers, Xi Jinping himself, is leading the central group of finance. And the very first meeting they talked about is about this issue of power and energy revolution. And this, now I do expect that this is a non-trivial issue.
Do you think it could become a major social issue over the next 10 years?
As I said, if it's a social issue, probably not among the general consumer, the households, but rather on the business side, right?
I'll just quickly throw in some numbers in terms of cost, because I think it's highly relevant to this discussion. The cost of installing photovoltaics 15 years ago, $70 a watt. Yesterday it was $0.7 a watt. I don't know what it is today, but we're on that Swanson linear semi-logarithmic plot, and it's going down all the time. What is missing, and we have discussed this, I've got this project with a bunch of friends in high places. We're trying to push for a big thrust in RD&D to deliver cheap energy storage and cheap smart grids so that we can deliver 24/7 electricity from renewables anywhere in the world cheaper than from coal. So already in China, it's cheaper to install photovoltaics and wind turbines to produce a kilowatt hour of electricity than it is for new coal-fired power. The problem is the energy storage. The problem is the intermittency.
Yeah.
And that's where we need a big focus internationally to see that we deliver. The feed-in tariffs across Europe have been amazingly successful at putting those prices down, but by the very nature of the term feed-in tariffs, they did nothing for storage and grids. So we need a deliberate effort focused on those. I saw another hand. There it is. Yeah.
And Dave Egan from Wales International Sustainability Unit, not the UK Secretary of State for Energy and Climate. Quick question about forests and sustainable land use, and what percentage of China's GHG emissions come from land use at the moment, and what the government's thinking in that respect. And then I also wanted to ask you more about the attitudes of young people in China, and where you feel it will all end, the current concern about air pollution and the like, and what people's social attitudes are, and what politics of all of this are, and how they're playing out. Come back to that where you began.
Well, for the land use land cover change, the overall let's put it this way. There is a negative side, there is a positive side. The negative part, the land use land cover change can be a source of carbon dioxide emitted to the atmosphere. And at the same time, ecosystems, the forest, reforestation, afforestation, then uptake the carbon from it. So put the two together, the balance is just about 4.5 million tons a year. So it has played a sink ever since the end of 1990s, 1998 and onward. You begin to see that turn from a source into a sink. And this 4.5 million tons carbon dioxide per year is just about equivalent to the carbon dioxide emitted from the industrial processes, like cement, that kind of thing. So this is just give you some numbers there. In terms of the attitude of the new generation, the younger generation, I think is well reflected in this video incident we have seen, because the viewers, this through the social media, but they are the younger generation. I mean, they are by now it's already exceeded 200 million, considering that there are just about 600 million users of social media, iPhones, and this kind of thing. This just 1 in 3 users of social media is really participating of this. Not to say perhaps one video is shared by a few people. So I think that this the younger generation began to. This is really enlightenment, for the younger generation, and this perhaps can develop into. There is a possibility this into a kind of a movement, when the younger generation to see their obligations and their role, the roles that they can play to make a better environment for themselves. Right.
You mentioned you work with the Prince of Wales, so let me just come back to the New York Declaration on Forests. This is an example of bilaterals working. British government initiative working with Norwegians and German governments produced this New York Declaration on Forests, September 23rd. The declaration says, we will stop all deforestation by 2030 around the world, and we will have begun reforestation to have reached the size of India reforested by that time. Now, that is a very substantial effort.
Right.
China's reforestation program in the Loess Plateau
Right.
is an exemplar of that
Right.
process. What does that do for CO2 emissions? That total effort is about the same as today's US emissions. Right, so we're talking about a process in which Britain, Germany, and Norway are working bilaterally. We're working, for example, with Colombia on mechanisms for avoiding deforestation, and we're backing it up. We've spent £500 million on that program already, as you know. So I think that I'm emphasizing this because while the focus this year is on the Paris Agreement, what I've just said is completely outside that agreement. We did take it to Lima, and I think we've now got 40 signatory countries to the New York Declaration. But it's all going to be done with bilaterals within that agreement between countries willing to assist with funds and countries with forests. Just important to emphasize, not everything is in the negotiation. Michael, we're going to come back and perhaps finish with you.
Sorry to come in again, but since you talk about declarations and what follows from them, I just wanted to raise a more general question. That last September, the World Bank convened the declaration at UNSG on carbon pricing. And this was sort of seen as trying to reinvigorate the global effort, dedication to it. 70 countries, 1,000 companies interested in structure of carbon. Now efforts are underway to try and build something more substantive on that, because let's face it, that was largely a PR. I just wondered, well, if either of you are involved in follow-up discussions, developments, discussions of a possible coalition around carbon pricing, and how that looks in particular in China.
I can answer that very quickly. I've long believed that carbon pricing through that Kyoto mechanism, the top-down, we'll all do this together, was never realistic. What we have is the development of a bottom-up process, European trading. Hopefully by 2020, we've got it up to a more realistic pricing. We've got California, Quebec, we've got a range of other pricing mechanisms, and then a very substantial pricing mechanism emerging in China across 7 provinces now,
right,
and extending into the future. I think that's the right way forward. So there's a potential then to merge into a single pricing mechanism, perhaps driven through by the WTO at some point in the future. But to have this bottom-up development is far more realistic than having the notion that we can agree internationally on how to operate that process.
Right, Mike, I didn't follow up with that particular program or particular effort, But let me take your question as an opportunity to offer some general comments on carbon pricing. I see this too often that people think the carbon market is the main, if not the only, mechanism to price carbon. In fact, there are many other mechanisms. The carbon market is a really important tool, as Dave and I were just mentioned. You know this very well, and we're expanding the coverage of a carbon market to cover the entire country. So this is certainly a major step forward for pricing carbon in China. In the same time, when we look at the EU ETS and carbon pricing in general, we're under the EU, and we discussed it the other day that there are other mechanisms, the regulations that require certain things to be done, and as a result of that, the carbon price can be much higher than under the EU ETS. So that kind of regulation or government mandate can really price a carbon in a very substantial way. Another mechanism, of course, is the taxation. Taxation also force the price of a carbon to form. So if we put this together, the carbon market, the mandate through regulation, and the taxation, they all come to one place for carbon pricing. Now the question is, what kind of system can be optimized, can be formed to optimize carbon price mechanisms? I think this is something very important at the current discussion in China, because now we're moving into that one direction, without considering very much, how you can actually you can integrate, different mechanisms for carbon pricing. I think that's the one area. That's the one area that needed a lot of research on itself and a lot of debate on that issue. I hope this UN or World Bank effort can bring in some more insights on that and help this policy design, because right now it's a really critical moment for that for design of that system. Okay.
I'm just going to wrap up with a brief comment. I'm going to refer to a trip that Yan and I made to Brazil. We went up to Northeast Brazil in October last year. And up there in Northeast Brazil, there is the most amazing biorefinery. 3.5 years ago, it was a PowerPoint presentation. It's now producing 22 million liters of fuel, liquid fuel for cars from second generation processing. So the material is the leaf material left after the sugar cane has been removed from the land for processing into sugar. They harvest the leaves, bundle them up, and they go into the beginning of the refinery. You just see these leaves going up and being dropped in. The refinery is the size of an oil refinery, and the initial process uses an enzyme based on the enzymes in a cow's stomach, essentially. So the enzyme consumes this material, turns it into carbohydrate, which can then be turned into alcohol. The first part of the process produces methane as a byproduct. The methane is used to drive the entire plant. There's no electricity going in to drive the plant. And then they've got excess methane. All of the material is picked up from excess methane and the rest is sold off. It's a net negative CO2 liquid energy source. The farmers have now got two products, sugar and alcohol. The alcohol is used in driving vehicles, so you buy it when you fill up in the cities of Brazil. I think the point I'm making here is that technology is moving the game very rapidly. None of you would be surprised at me emphasizing this point. But it now translate the potential into China. These massive leafy material wastes after rice cropping, etc. The potential is simply enormous. And I do think we need to focus not only on the details of negotiations, but also on what technological revolution is going to do for us as we move forward. Now, as you can see, I hope, Ye and I have established a very good friendship, which is also a working relationship between our two countries. And that is really one thing we wanted to emphasize by having this joint conversation. I just want to thank Ye for his ability, and I stress this, to talk with such frankness about the situation as he sees it in China. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.